in? No, they're still
44.
coming.
So I think I'm going to start. Hello, everybody. I'm Denny Egner. I'm the Whitewater chair of the Lower Columbia Canoe Club, and there's still people coming in. And Deborah Kane, our president, asked me to be here to welcome everyone tonight. She's not available tonight. And tonight's session is on Whitewater Judgement. And, you know, if Deborah knew anything about me, she probably wouldn't have asked me to, be here to welcome folks for Whitewater Judgement, because for many years, I've been known as Don't Follow Denny, where there was some questioning about my own Whitewater judgment. I always argued that, no, I had very good Whitewater judgment, and I would warn people to not follow me if I was going to try to do something stupid. So that was, a pretty good judgment. My own judgment in most cases was one of, if I was with somebody who I knew was a better boater than me, and they were going to walk something, I would definitely walk it. That's almost always been a rule that I followed. So it was pretty easy. As long as I had somebody that I knew was a better boater than me, I could judge whether or not, I was going to take a chance to do something stupid. Anyway, I've done lots of stupid things and I've survived so far. But most of the time I've been cautious when I needed to be. So hopefully we'll hear more about that tonight. This is again one of the continuing sessions in our series of safety talks. And right now I am going to introduce Teresa Greider, who's our safety chair with the club. And Teresa will introduce our speaker tonight. So Teresa, take it away.
All right. Well, I have to say that Denny has it's like radar for wood. Like if there's one person that I trust to detect a piece of wood in the river, it's Denny. And you don't learn that by accident. You learn that by running a lot of rivers and finding a lot of wood and learning maybe the hard way.
You missed my wood experience on the Mackenzie past summer.
What happened?
I didn't see the wood. And I was trying to get behind an eddy on the left side of the river where nobody else was going. And I went over there because I'd been over there many, many times. And I tried to get behind the eddy, and there was a piece of wood right under the water in front of the rock. And I hit it and I pinned. And my paddle went under the piece of wood. My hand grabbed a stick and I was just stuck there because I didn't want to let go of my paddle. I wasn't in danger, but I was stuck. I didn't want to let go of my paddle because there was nobody over there and who knows where the paddle was going to go. And I didn't want to let go of the stick because I was going to keep going over. And so eventually somebody came over. I let go of my paddle and could right myself. It was it was one of those really awkward places. So there's an account of it in the end of the year newsletter. So,
oh my goodness.
All right, I'll shut up.
And well, I'm glad you survived that. And that's how you learn, right?
That's right.
So that's Denny Egner. He's the Whitewater chair for the Lower Columbia Canoe Club.
And all we do as a Whitewater chair, it's like a really easy job. I just try to make sure there are trips every week.
Yeah, that's an important job.
Yeah, and we're going to have those trips coming back soon.
Soon, May 1st.
Yep.
I'm the safety chair, and I mainly write articles, and I've been helping coordinate this program with all of my wonderful, amazing guests. And tonight we have Priscilla Macy, who you see with the green shirt on. Make a movement there. That's Priscilla. Hello. And Priscilla lives in Salem with her husband, Jacob. And I wanted to ask, what's your favorite day run within an hour of where you live?
That is a great question. I would say Depending on the difficulty of the day we're looking for, we have two that are within an hour. One is called Rock Creek, or the kayaker name is Gladiator Creek, but it requires a 6-mile hike in. So if we're not feeling particularly spry and limber, we'll go for the other option, which is just a little bit closer to Salem, near Willamina, and that is Mill Creek. And that is a really, really cool class, 3-4 with 1, sometimes 4+ drop with roadside access, super beautiful. And I think about 30 minutes from our house. So can't beat that.
That is terrific. Yeah. And what year was it that you started paddling, Priscilla?
Oh man. Well, I guess the question would have to be what type of craft. So if you
Okay,
ask
inner tubes. What was
inner
first?
tubes, okay, inner tubes was definitely first on the stretch just outside my parents' house, which I'm at right now. So that was probably when I was in 6th grade. So
Okay.
13. Yeah.
All right. I get the flavor. And I know you've been a river guide, and I know you do whitewater kayaking. Have you
Mhm.
done some canoeing too?
I have not. I actually, sadly, but honestly, had an opportunity to jump in a canoe at Clackfest a couple years ago. And having watched a couple of my friends do it and tip over, I was a little discouraged. So I decided just to watch and cheer and jeer. But I would say that's one of the few crafts I haven't done. I have also not done a creature craft, but I've done a riverboard down a section of the Rogue. I've done a giant sup, a regular sup, IKs of various types, rafts, cat rafts, gear boats, inflatable animals.
Uh-huh. Oh my goodness, inflatable animals. Now
Yeah.
we're getting into some serious business. What kind of animals?
Yeah, I think I've done a killer whale down sections of the lower salmon, an inflatable dragon on the East Fork Lewis, and I can't remember the other one, but
Okay.
been
So
fun. I have not done a unicorn yet. I see a question from Katie.
yeah,
That is
that's a
the
good idea.
goal. And I wanted to do it at the creeking competition a few years ago, but the price of them at the time was a little bit too much, considering that I was probably going to pop it that weekend.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to mention you have your own business. Do you call it Recreate?
I call it recreate. So
Recreate.
yeah. Yeah. So the consulting business is mine and my husband's. We do everything from working with American Whitewater on advocacy projects. We've done a survey for the Department of State Parks for assessing the suitability for state scenic waterway on the South Umpqua. So there was some technically difficult sections on the river, and they were unable to survey them all. So they hired us to do the more technical sections, do GoPro photography, and kind of a technical basic science report. We've also done photography projects. One of my photos was bought by Henderson County Tourism Department in North Carolina. So it's basically a business for all the crazy fun projects that we like to do, and trying to put it under an umbrella. And more recently, I started as the executive director for Oregon Outfitters and Guides Association, which is a full-time plus job, but I still do the fun projects on the side with my husband through our consulting company.
Okay. Do the Oregon Outfitters and Guides call themselves UGA?
Yep. We do. And then the Idaho side of it, which a close friend of mine is the executive director for, is IUGA.
UGA.
So fun words.
Yeah. Well, I know you have a bunch of slides for us, and I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. For all of you folks that are out there listening, if you have questions for Priscilla, would you please type them into the chat window, and I'll make a list, and I'll do the butting in if butting in needs to happen, and otherwise we'll just save most of the questions for the very end. Sound good?
Sounds great.
All right, and just in case you were wondering, Deborah Kane is not actually here. The person behind the Deborah Kane face up there is my partner, Will Gare, the safety chair for the Canoe Club, and he's hopefully letting people in. and hopefully also switching over so that Priscilla can share her screen.
Yes, yes. All right. Well, with that, I will share my screen and let's see, Keynote. There we go. Allow Zoom. Come on. Sorry, one moment. I got a new laptop and it is asking me to allow it to share my screen. So I'm just allowing it.
Okay, sounds good. There's always a little lag.
There we go. Oh no. I have to rejoin the meeting. I will leave the meeting and I will let you rejoin me and then we'll be all set.
Okay.
All right.
Meanwhile, does anybody have questions for Priscilla?
I have a correction. You mentioned that Will is the safety chair. You are the safety chair, and he is
I meant to
the
say conservation.
the conservation chair, which you knew.
Of course.
Yeah.
But talking is hard. What do you guys think are the important components of judgment? Put it in the chat. Let's see. Humility, that's a good one. Mm-hmm. I think being able to see other people's state of mind as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All of them.
Yeah, right. You're an amazing boater. I would always follow you, Teresa. So if you were walking, I was definitely going to walk.
That's a problem.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is Jacob, Priscilla's husband. She's trying to get back in and says she needs someone to admit her.
Okay, and Will's having trouble letting her in, so I'm going to go around to the other side and see what I can do.
We have flawless technological skills here at the Lower Columbia Canoe Club. But I think we'll have it worked out in a moment.
I think by definition, that's incorrect. Can we tell river jokes while we're waiting?
Oh. Yeah. Oh, you have this. Okay. Hey, it's Priscilla again. Teresa, I think I assigned you as the co-host, so the admit should come through yours.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. So let's see. I'm holding two computers, so.
And now you're not at the top anymore, so.
Okay, let me try to add again and it should give you a prompt. Connecting. Host will let you in soon. Okay, it looks like it's working now. There you go. All right, sorry. Can everyone hear me?
I can.
Perfect. I think we got it figured out.
Yay.
Okay, so now I just,
brainstorming in the chat about all the components of Judgment. It's been a great brainstorm.
oh, good, good. So it looks like I need to be made the host now, and then I can share my screen and we'll be all good to go.
Okay, so that's me.
Yes, and you just click the 3 dots next to my face.
Picture. You got it? No.
And let's see, make you host.
Yep. All right, there we go.
It is
Okay. Share, and we can do this. Is that showing up correctly?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, on to the presentation. I was just giving everyone time to grab a drink. All right. So my talk will be a little bit about lessons that I have learned along my route to paddling and running rivers, including mistakes I've made and things I've wished I did better, and then things that I've learned from mentorship and doing trips on my own with very competent groups, and how to be in what I like to call, and what my husband and I like to call, an asset in paddling. You never want to be a liability in the group. You always want to be an asset, whether that's a specific skill set. You don't necessarily have to be a trip leader to be an asset. You can provide multiple benefits to the group just by honing in on what your strengths are. So for me, I mentioned a little bit about loving to paddle in multiple crafts. So here's a few photos of some of the crafts. Doing an inner tube race on the Clackamas, riding an inflatable dinosaur on the East Fork Lewis, running an IK over Punchbowl Falls on Eagle Creek before the fire, and then paddling a hardshell kayak, which a lot of you know I like to paddle, paddling a sup squatch on the Rogue with a bunch of close friends that I grew up with. And then the IK picture in the middle is the Upper East Fork Hood. And then the raft is me rowing Greenwall for the first time on the Illinois River, which is one of my favorite drainages in all of Oregon. It's a very special place. So regardless of craft, I really enjoyed spending time on or around rivers, and that came from growing up in Southern Oregon and spending a lot of time with having my parents take us out to the Umpqua rivers, the Rogue River, swimming, catching salamanders, doing a lot of fun things. And then that gradually turned into wanting to be on those rivers and to navigate them. Eventually I became a river guide in Southern Oregon for orange torpedo trips. And then I worked my way up to being a guide in Idaho, and then ended up running their nonprofit arm, which is Leap Therapeutic Wilderness Adventures, which ran trips on the Lower Rogue, the Lower Salmon, and we brought various nonprofit groups down the river and ran therapeutic wilderness therapy programs. Once I became a guide, I became pretty interested in rescue and rescue techniques, and wanting to teach them to others. A few of these photos is from a whitewater rescue class that I helped coordinate with the Coast Guard that we did with Noah's Rafting Company and Lucas Lodge. We got a pretty cool opportunity to see what it would look like for an actual air extraction and what to do, what it looks like to set up a landing zone. The helicopter picture is actually at the confluence of the Illinois and the Rogue at pretty high water. We also set up a strainer so that we could learn just how difficult it was to get off of one in a current, and also learn the techniques of how to rescue. And later, when I was going to college at OSU, I ended up teaching whitewater rescue and as a student teaching aide, and also teaching wilderness first response. And I just became really interested in that aspect of paddling. And once I started paddling harder whitewater, I learned how important it is to know those skills and to be able to know them well enough that you can apply them to any situation. So when I first started kayaking, it was probably on the precipice of the time when GoPro scouting and social media and Instagram and just the wealth of knowledge was available for boaters, which I think is a great benefit, but can also come with some downsides. When I was learning to kayak, me and a group of motivated friends who had never paddled hard shells but had been river guides before just decided we wanted to learn it one year. Went and bought some used kayaks from Sundance Kayak in Southern Oregon, and then spent the winter every weekend that we could paddling and figuring out rivers by reading Oregon Kayaking's trip reports, making a list of what we wanted to see, marking our soggy sneakers hard copies, and by reading American Whitewater. Then in college, I ended up meeting my now husband, Jacob Cruiser, through a group of paddling friends who, some of them, we were in the same program in my undergraduate through the College of Forestry. And from that point, we instantly started enjoying spending time together because both of us just wanted to get out and adventure. And from that point, he became a friend and a mentor. And then eventually we ended up getting married, and we still do a lot of adventures together. So one of the things I wanted to point out is that, living near paddling options has been a privilege and has greatly influenced my ability to progress myself. So living where we do in the Willamette Valley, we're not that far from the Columbia River Gorge, doing vacation trips up to BC or down to the Sierras is not very far, down to the Trinity areas, the Klamath. Living in Southern Oregon, there's a multitude of paddling options. So I feel very fortunate that that was my opportunity. And once I became interested in paddling, I only felt more compelled to check out some of those areas that I thought, when I had a lesser skill set, were a little bit out of reach. Like I mentioned, one of the things that really helped me in my paddling and helped me fulfill my curiosity to see more streams is meeting my partner and husband, Jacob. And when we were in college, we tried to spend as much time together in paddling and spending it on and near the water. And he has taught me a lot of things coming from a almost lifelong experience of paddling, which I didn't have. I just was really interested in it. And actually one of the first times we paddled together was we R2'd the Little White at summer flows in a 10-foot raft. So that's a surefire test of if you can get along, if you put yourselves in a closed, a very small craft and have to get down a technical creek. So it was a good sign that we did it successfully and still wanted to talk to each other afterwards. So one of the things that when we were talking about this talk, Teresa and I were talking about what are the lesser developed paddling knowledge or skill sets that people need to know, things that you've learned over time or mistakes that might be made. One of the things we talked about was water levels. It's something that I think most paddlers know you need to be aware of, but what comes from experience is knowing what's it mean when a gauge is going up versus what it means when it's going down. If you want to run, say, Upper Quartzville Creek, there's a huge difference between if it rained the night before and the gauge is going down to the rain starting in the morning or having been raining all night and continuing through the day. It's one of those things where you can drive up the creek and it looks clear, and then an hour later while you're waiting for your friends, it's brown and very hard whitewater. So knowing what that is and kind of knowing how to read storm systems and weather for the area that you're about to paddle in can make the difference between a very difficult and sometimes intimidating paddling run, or even on the other side of things is hiking into a creek while the water's going down, and by the time you get there, there's not enough water in the creek left. Both of which I've experienced. The other thing is, where is the gauge? There's a lot of gauges that end up being estimates. So it could be off of a bigger river and a different drainage. So knowing the location of where you're paddling can often change what the outcome is for what you expect in terms of flows. Diurnals is something that we don't really get in Oregon, but if you're paddling in California, especially in the Sierras, it's good to be aware of what the diurnal is. And what a diurnal is when the sun comes up and hits the snow at the higher elevations that are feeding the creek, it melts and the flow will rise. When it gets colder, the flow drops. And so you see this wave-like pattern of flows. So that may influence what time of day you want to paddle, or what time of year you might want to paddle. Of course, the other thing is, just because you can paddle class 4 on a river like the Rogue doesn't mean that paddling class 4 on a creek like Courtsville Creek is going to feel the same. It also doesn't mean that paddling class 4 on a river like the Lochsa or a bigger water river is going to feel the same. There are different skill sets needed for each type of creek, river, or flow that you want to run. And all can be enjoyable, but it is important to know that the rating system doesn't really tell you the whole picture. Logistics, that's where it gets really fun. Jacob is the expert with logistics. I'm the expert with photography and editing photos, and have some other skill sets. But what I've learned from him taking on logistics is, knowing how to navigate roads, knowing how to navigate access, really knowing what the time commitment is for each run. So when you're paddling in the winter, it might not be the best idea to put in on a long, say 8-mile run that might have some scouts and portages that you don't know at 11 a.m. You're probably going to get stuck in the dark. When it's the spring or summer, that's a little bit different. If you're doing a run that you really wanted to do where you're having to navigate logging roads that are only open in November because it's hunting season, you better know those roads really well and probably have downloaded a map. Also knowing group dynamics and skill sets. So not only what is the collective skill set that you have as a group, have you worked together in the past? Do you work well now? Also, sorry, allowing someone in. Being able to identify what your own skill sets are and what your own liabilities are. So knowing that you're not comfortable running a certain type of rapid, or knowing that you might struggle on difficult portages and being able to ask the group for help. Setting an intention. If you're someone in the group that's of a lesser skill set but wanting to learn, then tell the group, hey, I want to practice catching eddies and doing ferries. Is that something that is going to work on this trip, or are we going to be pressed for time? So I think that's a really important thing to be able to do. The last point is stewardship and responsible paddling. As our sport grows, it becomes more and more important to be able to have an outward-facing public perception that's positive. We've seen plenty of examples where the paddling community can be seen as, aggressive, thrill-seeking, adrenaline junkies. And this happened in an example on the Kaituna in New Zealand. There was conflict between tribal values and paddler values, and they had to reconcile that. And a lot of it was just unfair assumptions about either group. But I think when we go into places, everything from not driving 50 miles an hour in a small community that has a 25-mile speed limit, not drinking beers on the side of the road and being obnoxious, not leaving trash in places, or better yet, picking up trash and taking it out with us. Creating a welcoming community, so not looking down on paddlers that say you're living in Hood River and you're taking out at BZ and see a group of people putting in at BZ for the middle white. Be just as stoked to see them as you are to see friends at the put in for the truss, or at least give them the benefit of having the same welcoming community as the people that you paddle with. The other thing is this all leads into access and conservation. If people view paddlers as responsible people, then that changes a conversation that we have when we're trying to fight for access and we're trying to maintain these places for future generations to enjoy.
Wonderful.
What was that?
I said that's wonderful. Liz.
Oh, yes, agreed.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll go to the next section of my talk. So talking about some of the skill sets that I've learned are important to paddling. And this is not exclusive to adventure paddling. I think it applies to any type of paddling. So if you want to be excelling on your class 3 run, be taking new people down, this all applies. In the last part of the presentation, we'll go into some of the skill sets that are more required for doing off the beaten path paddling. This is a section of a boulder garden on Christie Creek, I believe. I could be wrong though. I'll let Jacob correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. One of the things that I learned is if you make your backyard run a training ground, it not only becomes a fun activity, like I wouldn't say going to the gym is fun, but it no longer becomes like, I'm looking forward to this paddling trip and all I'm thinking about is getting through the next rapid and doing it safely. If you're using your background run as a place of training, backyard run meaning something that's close enough to you to do frequently and something that you know well enough that you're not taking any risks by doing more difficult maneuvers. So on this run, I know this eddy. Eddy was there. I knew the hazards of the hole and I wanted to push my ability to catch difficult eddies. And so I was practicing that. If I was running this creek for the first time, I probably wouldn't have done that. I probably would have been intimidated and wanted to have an idea of what was downstream and know that I could make that move before doing that. So this runs true for even class 1 features. I find when I'm trying to surf on little waves that are very small, I can learn a lot by just figuring out how to use my boat better, use my body better, how to read water better. It doesn't have to be difficult whitewater to be able to improve your paddling. So this is one of the harder rapids on Mill Creek that I was talking about. And so this is one of our backyard runs that we've certainly used to practice our skill building. Another thing that I learned that has been enhanced by technology is being able to critique your own lines. So if you have a phone or a GoPro with the instant replay, I find that to be extremely helpful. Or if you have a camera with an instant replay, you can go to rapids. This is the entrance to Thor's Playroom on Opal Creek, which is very easy to run laps on. And what Jacob would do is he would film me, or I'd have my GoPro. And then at the end of the lap, we'd watch it and critique it together. And then I'd do it again and try to improve on my last line. The nice thing about this rapid too is there's multiple lines that you can take, so you can practice multiple skill sets. And again, you can watch yourself and learn. I feel like when I was early in learning and having people critique me, I didn't believe their critiques because I couldn't see it. So for me, being someone that's incredibly visual, the ability to do my own feedback and evaluation process was very valuable to my improvement in the long run. And it's fun to go back and look at old video and see how much better you got over the years. Another skill set, one that I'm very much still working on, is getting comfortable surfing in holes and learn how to get out of them. And also be comfortable flipping over in them. This is a small hole on, I believe, Calapooya River, not far from us as well. And just a very friendly hole. I think I flipped over it in it a couple times, nice eddy service, but just learning how to use my boat in the hole, learning how to get out of it, and learning how to flip in a turbulent situation. It's really nice to use surf features to do this, especially ones that end in a pool where you're not worried about what's happening downstream. You're just focusing on the improvement and spending as much time as you need to there to do so. Take opportunities to practice safety and rescue in different scenarios and settings, and be proficient with the tools you have. The #1 tool is good equipment and a throw bag. What I like to practice and what we like to practice and tell people to practice is anytime you get out of your boat, bring your throw bag. You never know what could happen. Someone, everyone in the group could be getting out to scout. Someone falls in, needs a throw bag. I've been in a scenario where that has happened. You're getting out, you want to take photos, someone else has a throw bag, someone decides to run the rapid, the first person misses a throw bag toss. Always bring your throw bag. You should never not have a throw bag. And also practice anticipating. What's it going to look like if he swims? Where's he going to end up? Do I have someone in a boat to help retrieve gear? How am I going to communicate to that person if they're swimming or if they're in trouble? What are the hazards? So proactively thinking about these things and putting yourself in the best position to be able to help them. Picture of me paddling in California and my friend Ben anticipating if I had trouble, it would be in this hole. And I would likely need a rope here so that he could pull me away from it. Another picture, it looks like part of the picture cut out, but this was another rapid I ran. This one was in Montana or Idaho. It was on the border, so I can't remember exactly where it was. But in the bottom of the picture, which I'm not seeing anymore, Jacob was set up for safety in the place where I would have ended up if I had trouble. One of the things to practice as well, regardless of where you want to end up in your paddling, is learn how to be a leader on the water and practice showing paddlers down a river that those people haven't seen themselves. So I found Opal Creek, which unfortunately has been severely impacted by fire. That was one of my favorite creeks to bring people down. There were enough rapids that it was difficult to remember all the moves. There were eddies to catch and a few hazards, places you needed to set safety, places you needed to tell people where to scout. And it was really enjoyable to watch people learn how to make their own decisions about what rapids they wanted to paddle, whether they wanted to run Big Fluffy that day or Big Ugly that day, or whether they wanted to portage it, and teaching people how to portage effectively. The most important thing being, remember what the rapids are and what is the important beta to give. You don't want to give people a novel of information before running a rapid they're probably a little bit nervous about, but you want to make sure to give them the critical information and allow them the opportunity to ask questions once you've given them that information. Another thing is being able to become familiar with group dynamics, trip planning, and being able to recognize what skill sets are needed to be an asset to the group and what skill sets you don't have. What are your flaws and what are your shortcomings? In our group, in this picture, a close group that we do a lot of off beaten path trips, our friend Adam is incredibly skilled at rope work and incredibly strong. That's one of his many qualities. Jacob is incredibly talented with logistics. Ben is very talented with being able to probe a rapid and run very hard rapids and set safety in very difficult spots. I'm good at bringing snacks, taking photos, and often communicating, I think, fears and concerns that maybe wouldn't get brought up otherwise. So, I've been much better about this recently, but saying, I'm really worried about this or that. And sometimes in groups, people aren't willing to bring that up. But I think part of being close to a group is knowing maybe I need to bring this up, or maybe I don't need to bring this up. And more importantly, knowing where you're lacking and being able to ask for help and being able to take direction from the leaders in the group. So the second part of the presentation, or I guess the third part of the presentation, preparing for paddling off the beaten path. This is the Brighton Bush River, and we are taking a friend down and running laps on this first drop and describing how to read Whitewater and how to describe information in the group. One of the things that I've learned is if you're wanting to paddle off the beaten path, there is not enough to be said about the benefits of low water exploration. Low water can be more difficult, and it can be frustrating to be bumping off of rocks and scooting your butt on gravel bars at times. But when you get to the rapids that are difficult, having the slow moving water and the eddy to scout from, and the eddy at the bottom or the pool at the bottom, or the bank of the river that's a little bit lower to portage on, is incredible. There's nothing more scary than a high water river that you don't know, and know where to stop. So we really enjoy doing low water trips, especially on rivers that we don't know, because it just slows everything down, gives you the opportunity to truly enjoy the place that you're in. And it gives you the opportunity to really learn the character of the river and to make good decisions as you make progress downstream. There's another picture of a low water trip in Southwest Oregon, and you can see there's still plenty fun moves, but there's also lots of water to get out and stop, eddy out, scout, be safe, and communicate. Take opportunities, become comfortable with wood and how to deal with it. I think in certain scenarios, we're never going to be entirely comfortable with wood, but in a lot of scenarios, especially where we live, if you're wanting to paddle more than just the standard runs, and even at times the standard runs, you're going to have to deal with wood, know how to read it from upstream, know how to deal with it on the water, whether that means portaging, ducking under it, rolling under it, helping other people go around it or portage it. It's going to be something that you'll eventually have to deal with at least once in your paddling career, especially if you're in this area. So again, another benefit of low water exploration is if you are in a creek that has wood hazards, everything's going to be much slower, and you can think about what is the approach I want to do to deal with this. And then eventually when you do it enough, it's going to become a second nature decision because you will have built those experiences through memory on what to do in these scenarios. If you really want to get into adventure, dialing in and testing out your backpack system or carry system is going to be very important. A lot of the off the beaten path creeks are going to require a little bit more effort to access, sometimes not, but there's nothing worse than putting on your backpack system and having all the buckles break in the first 100 feet or realizing it's incredibly uncomfortable in the first 150 feet and you have 6 miles to go. So something that Jacob and I have done to try out different versions of our systems, which is kind of funny for the neighbors, is we'll put it on and walk around the block. And then we'll try to make little adjustments in our garage, whether it's adding more padding or changing how the straps are configured. But we've definitely been happy that we've tested it out before getting into the scenario where we're totally committed to carrying our boat, and finding out that the pack didn't work. Another aspect of off the beaten path or just paddling more difficult rivers is really getting comfortable with portaging, getting out of your boat, and scouting. Even getting out of your boat can be difficult sometimes. Depending on the landscape, it's not always going to be a nice eddy in a gravel bar. It might be a nice eddy in a steep piece of rock that you have to balance to get out of your boat and climb out of, and then also not lose your boat while doing it. Learning how to help people with portaging and scouting and not just going off and doing your own thing. In this scenario, we all helped each other get over this gap in the rock, and it made everything a lot less stressful, and we ensured that we were doing it in the safest manner possible, while also doing it in the most efficient manner possible and not leaving anyone behind or losing track of where people in the group were. Here's a picture of one of our friends portaging a drop by going up and over a steep rock formation. He had the skill set to do so. And in a later picture, you'll see another member of that group who was comfortable seal launching and chose to go that route. But both of them were able to make safe decisions that were best for both of them without causing any harm to the group. But they were able to do that because they had a number of experiences that informed them and gave them the ability to make those decisions in the past. So, and now we go into seal launching. Personally, I am not a huge fan of seal launching. It always makes me nervous, even though I know it's going to go well and I've gotten better at it over the years. I still have that memory in my head of, the one time that I seal launched and then I flipped over right above a rapid. Even though I know that's not going to happen, it gets to me mentally. So I don't like doing it, but I know it's important to know how to do it. So practicing it in non-consequential settings, if there's a rock on the side of the river on the Illinois that you can just plop into the river on, go ahead and practice that. If there's something on your local river in the summer where there's a rock, you can practice doing it where the water's warm. You can practice launching and then purposefully flipping over and flipping back over again to get that kind of anxiety out of your head. That's great too. Practice recognizing where you can and cannot seal launch. You don't want to seal launch into a shallow landing. There's plenty of examples where that's resulted in injury and bad consequences. So be able to recognize where it works, where it doesn't work, how to do it, and just practice it. Make it fun for yourself. So here's a picture of our friend Ben, who was comfortable seal launching off of a rock past a log jam that our other friend was hiking around. For both of them, it worked. Neither of them really delayed the other person, and the trip went well, but they were able to make those decisions and communicate that to each other before those decisions were made. A big part, and this not only applies to off the beaten path paddling, but everyday paddling. Learn how to group problem solve, learn how to communicate with the people you're paddling with. When you're on the river, most often the people you're paddling with are going to be the people that are your first responders if something goes wrong. They're going to be the people that help you out of a bad scenario. You're going to be the person to help them out of a bad scenario. So learn how to communicate with the group, learn how to solve problems of all types as a group, and more importantly, learn how to lead and when to follow. If it's a scenario you're unfamiliar with, it's probably not your time to lead. If you're with someone that has medical expertise and there's a medical scenario, they're now in charge and you're going to follow them. I like this picture because it was a complex problem, not quite like anything we'd come to before, but we were paddling the creek at low water, which allowed us to not be committed in this very vertical gorge. We were able to get out, use our separate skill sets to make the right decision. Some people ended up running a slot with a big hole. And then another person who had run it before set up safety with a rope, and we throw and go'd, which throwing your boat and jumping in after it, for the people that didn't want to kayak the drop. And the other person threw a rope downstream so that there was no risk of the person who jumped in and didn't run the rapid of getting pulled back. So it was a complex problem to solve, but we took the time to solve it and used our collective skill sets to come to the right decision. And it ended up being kind of fun in the end. And this is a downstream view of that same drop. You can kind of see the pocket in the hole and the rock where someone would have stood with a rope to make sure that people got out safely. Learn how to boat scout and how to effectively communicate beta. Boat scouting can be incredibly fun, but it is a thin line of when it's fun and when you go too far and you don't have a way to get out of it. So you practice this by doing it on familiar rivers, trying new eddies, doing it on rivers well within your skill set, and figuring out what are the signs of a dead end rapid. How far can I see when I'm making the decision to go an eddy further? When I am the person catching those eddies in boat scouting, how do I then communicate information to the paddlers behind me, whether that's hand signals or verbal beta, or it's getting out and walking upstream because I know the best way to do so is to talk to them in the eddy because I can't communicate it another way. Those are all things you learn by trying and doing and practicing. This is a picture of one of our friends leading and one of our friends following on a section of Whitewater on the Lostine River in the Wallowas, which is an incredible area in Northeast Oregon. And lastly, be ready to seize unique opportunities when they come. The reason we do all this preparation and practice is so that when the stars align and that river is finally in and accessible that we've always wanted to paddle, we're not worrying if we have the skill set to do it. We're just worrying that, or we're just excited that the opportunity has come up to be able to actually do it. You know, we don't live in a perfect, well, I guess in some regions in the United States, you can rely on dam releases. But for the most part, we're relying on weather patterns, roads to be accessible, conditions to be great to be able to paddle these things. So you don't want to be worrying about your skill set when the opportunity comes by. You just want to be excited about it and be able to say yes. This is another one of those incredible opportunities. This is the big dog fork on the Kallawash River. Really spectacular segment. And this is a photo of our friends running the Imnaha, another rare opportunity in the Wallowas. And this is Rock Creek, Gladiator Creek, that I talked about earlier in the presentation as one of our close to home runs. This is Vesuvius Falls. Everything is gladiator themed on that run, which is really fun.
Well,
and lastly, here's some follow-up information. Jacob keeps a pretty good blog of all of our adventures and some thoughts on lessons learned on River Talk podcast, which is something that I co-host with friends Eric Wyseth and Zach Collier. We talk about all things. We've had a few talks about river safety and river gear, which I think are fitting to this talk. And of course, keeping up to date on important issues, safety and current river information on American Whitewater is great. And for those of you that listen to Charlie Walbridge's talk, we know how important it is to document safety information and to keep his accident database up and going. So I really appreciate, I'll change the host real quick before let's see, Teresa.
are we running out of time?
No, we're good. I was just making you the host so that since I don't need to screen share anymore. But yeah, that's it for my formal presentation, but I'm happy to hear questions, comments, and answer what I can.
All right. Well, I've got a couple of questions written down, and I see that Mambo's got a question. Do you want to unmute yourself, Mambo, and ask?
Sure. Thank you, Teresa, and thank you, Priscilla. I've got a lot, but most of it is kind of supporting what you've already said. I love the piece on boat scouting on rivers, you know. I mean, that's where that weird word complacency comes in. You know, you're doing your backward flow. Yeah, we've done it. But what you're saying is you're practicing skills that when you're on a river you don't know, or you're on a river you don't know, but the buddy in front does, that's where you practice it. And that was excellent. Learn when to lead and not to follow. Lee Baker made a comment earlier about let's talk openly about ego. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's when, you know, yeah, I'm ACA certified Swiftwater rescue trainer and I know what to do, but I've never been on this river before.
Exactly.
That is so key. That is so key. Public perception. I literally, when you said that piece, I ran and got this old river safety task force from Charles Woodbridge from 76 to 82. And in it, he talks about flood stage in the eastern rivers, the Okanagan, or I can't pronounce those, and how while people were losing their homes, yackers were cruising through because they were doing, you know, class 5 flood stage.
Yeah.
And the perception was, I mean, it was talked about in the newspapers, local radio stations. Earlier this year in the pandemic, people were skipping ropes and crossing private land to get into the white salmon. Early on, we didn't know a lot about the pandemic, even though ultimately it was relatively safe. The issue was not pretty. And so you talked about driving fast through small towns on your shuttle or something. Sometimes your actions can be so minor to your mind and so major to the people who live there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just to be cognizant of that. Learning styles. You talked about learning styles and how you figured out that yours is visual. I don't have the information at hand, but all of us have learning styles. Some of it's audio, some of it's physical repetition by rote, some of it's visual. One of the most important things we can do in any aspect is to learn our learning style, because that's how we can best learn. I love that you added that piece. I think that's the only question I had was logistics. Back in the logistics part, you led with collective and individual skills, and the last thing you listed was the intention of the trip. I thought that should be the first. What is the intention of the trip? Then assess individual and group skills and whatnot. But that was the only question. Well, yeah. No, I had one more. I'm a ski, I'm a ski instructor.
Okay.
My wife took up skiing very well. I don't want to say late in her life because she's nearby, but one of the things that I found as a ski instructor is I could teach her some fundamentals, but after that, an instructor sometimes needs to be demanding.
Mhm.
You know, you must do this. No, you must, no questions. And we found that difficult. So I would, after I taught her some very basics, how to go to put them on, take them off the snowplow, I handed her over to a class,
Mhm.
an instructor. And I thought if your experience with your husband's made any kind of transition like that, that's
Yeah.
thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. I think to the first question, I didn't necessarily put them in a priority order, but I think you're right. I think setting the intention should probably be earlier on. So when you're planning a trip, if you're someone that wants to practice your skills and you're signing up for an exploratory trip where the time is limited, that'd be a good time to bring it up for sure. You don't want to surprise your friends at the put-in saying something like that. With the instruction, it's certainly not been an easy road for me and my husband. And I think I have to credit most of it to Jacob being an incredible adaptive educator and being very patient with me. I think in most scenarios, it would be wise to transition the person you're teaching to a class or professional educator once you get past the basics, especially if you're in an intimate relationship with that other person. It can certainly cause stresses on other components of your relationship. But I'll ask my husband, Jacob, to unmute himself and see if he has any bullet points from what he's learned in teaching me to paddle and kind of what we've learned as a team.
Oh, that sounds like a whole presentation on its own.
I figured that was his answer, but do you have any quick answers?
Tell you what, I'll put some things in a bullet point and send it out in an email later.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
Didn't mean to put him on the spot, but he's really the teacher in this relationship, so I don't feel like I have the qualifications to answer that appropriately.
Right.
So the translation, Jacob, is I pass.
Well, I've got more questions.
Priscilla is great and put in a lot of effort to learn and is still learning. So it's tough, but good and very complicated. So bullet points coming later.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I've got a question. It has to do with the signaling systems that you guys use. Most of us already know the standard American Whitewater signals for all clear, come ahead and stop and go left and go right in emergency. But will you teach us a few of your signals?
Sure. I wish I had a paddle with me. Often on trips, what happens is someone in the group will run a rapid first. That we don't know the beta on. We'll be eddied out waiting. We can obviously see them. And they will signal with their paddle, which is really useful. So pointing the direction of where you want to go with the paddle, because the paddle can obviously be seen much higher up, which is helpful if you're doing a drop. The other thing is, what's fun is, if there's a rapid and there's like a tongue. So going like the tongue, go down the tongue, it's good to go. Let's see, most people probably know this one, but boof, so the boof is good. Let's see, nose, so nose of your boat, left or right, that's a good one. So you could say go down the center of the rapid but nose left, so you want to end that way. And what we've learned with paddling with different groups, it's easy to get into a rhythm with groups that you know really well and everyone has the same language. What we've done a better job of in recent years is saying, well, we're going to use this sort of communication on this river. Does this work for you? Or what do you use? What kind of signals do you use? which is helpful. But I find that most of our hand communication is just really visually and intuitive, that even if they didn't know, it would mostly be pretty easy to interpret. And then the other thing is, if you don't understand what they're saying, you can just be like, I don't know what you're saying, and get out and scout it if you can. Don't commit to something that you don't know the outcome is, if that's avoidable.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got a question from Lee Baker earlier. He wanted to hear about a time that you got really scared.
Oh, there's lots of them. Well, a really good learning experience for me was on Bridge Creek, which is in California and goes into Woolly Creek. It's a really steep section. Used to be done a lot, now has quite a bit of wood. So we planned for a multi-day trip. We got to the last drop, which I think was a 20-foot waterfall, been running out of daylight. I was extremely motivated, optimistic, and happy for most of the trip. When I realized daylight was waning, I started to get more nervous. And when the portages got a little more difficult, we had to set up a zip line for one portage on the side of the river. I started just feeling this kind of loom of nervousness. And we got to the lip of this 20-footer, which I could only see the lead into, which looked like a pretty difficult lead in, and then tall drop. I was like, I really don't want to run this, but there wasn't a portage option. And Jacob just said, we have to run it. We're running out of daylight. And I knew that was the only thing that we could do. Like I knew what I was getting into. I knew this was on the run. It was time to do it. And I was crying and kind of shaking at the lip of the waterfall, got in to my boat, made the mistake that you can often do when you're nervous, is kind of freezing up, fight or flight. I did not have the fight mechanism in that scenario, froze up and missed a critical stroke, rolled over at the end of the waterfall, and was recirculating in this pool, which wasn't very large. But when I was upside down and being in this panicked state, I felt like it was the worst thing. Swam, and because I had already been nervous and freaking out, I was hyperventilating. And even though I had plenty of air, I felt like I couldn't breathe. Jacob ended up hiking out the rest of the run with me. And we ended up spending an extra night and having the other two people in our group paddle Woolly Creek and call and let people know that we were okay, but just taking an extra day. And so we proceeded to hike out the way that most people hike into Woolly Creek, which was interesting. And what I learned is I didn't necessarily have all the skill sets that I needed to have on that trip. I needed to be able to be nervous and be able to have the confidence that I can pull a left stroke when I needed to on that drop. And I wasn't quite there yet. So I tried to learn from that mistake. But it was certainly a scary experience for me, but I think what I learned from it was probably valuable enough that it was worth having that experience for.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question on that note.
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, I'm a class 5 boater, but because I get afraid, I have to call myself class 4. Because I noticed that it would react. I mean, it would mess up my reactions. It would cause me to second guess myself. And so I was like, I'm a class 5 practicing 4 boater.
Yeah. I think it's great that we can recognize those things in ourselves. I've done a lot of that myself. I am comfortable running difficult whitewater in certain scenarios in very specific conditions, and I'm not comfortable in a lot of conditions, and I've had to learn to say no and when to recognize that for myself. I'd much rather paddle class 4 plus and portage class 5. There's some, like last year I think it was last year, feeling really great about paddling class 5, and it was all fun. And the year before I was terrified. I think we have to recognize on a continuous basis what our strengths and weaknesses are, and make the best decision for ourselves and not feel shame or ego involved in those decisions. Because ultimately, I think most of us want to paddle long term. And if we start making decisions for the wrong reason, we're probably not going to paddle for long term.
Agreed. Yeah. Oh, Tree had another question. She was the same person that was just speaking, but she wrote earlier, do you have a tool or a mantra or a ritual that you use before you go big to calm down your fear, to have the best surf, etc.?
Yeah, I would say something that I picked up from Jacob, and I can't remember where he got it from, is I had this written on the cockpit of my boat when I was running harder Whitewater, which has been about a year that I haven't, for many reasons. I've had an injury I'm working through, but when I was running hard Whitewater, I had in Sharpie written, don't be a coward. And there was a line and it said, make good decisions. So balancing the fine line of don't be a coward when you decide to go, and then make a good decision. So don't run a rapid just because you want to impress your friends. And I remember someone telling me that when I was running a rapid is, are you running this for you, or are you running this because you feel like you're going to make yourself look good in front of the group? So I thought that was the best centering, and I wrote the line between them like right in the center of my boat, because I kind of have trouble figuring out the center of my boat sometimes. But the idea was center yourself between those two statements. And I think that was empowering and focusing, and it really helped me get into what you might think of as a flow state of, this is my objective, I've made the decision, this is all that matters.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, the questions are starting to pour in now. There's two about injuries. One was Tree asking, what was your injury? And by the way, you guys, Tree's the person that's speaking in 2 weeks about fitness for paddling.
Ooh, awesome.
Knowledge, and she's here tonight. But the other one is from Gavin, and it's about tips for dealing with injuries in wilderness settings. What do you look for when planning exit strategies if it goes poorly?
Yeah, great questions. The first one, my injury is, I was born with a shallow hip, not so much that it can be diagnosed, it's just short of the measurement I learned. But I have a labral tear in my hip. And so in the last year, it's gotten pretty bad to where I'm sore right now, having done the lower rogue, which for me is, I think I've done it over 25 times, very normal trip for me. But hiking and any sort of continuous impact, which Tree would understand, can cause a significant amount of pain because I don't have the cushion between my femur and my hip socket anymore.
Awesome. Well, this is perfect for all kayakers to see, not just because that's kind of what you need specially. I mean, everybody that kayaks needs to address hips.
Yep. So both me and my husband would strongly agree with that.
And me too. Yeah.
And the other question was wilderness medicine. So depending on where you are, I think something that I like to find out, most of the people we paddle with in that setting, we know pretty well. So we know their basic health history just from long-term relationships, if they have any allergies or issues. Like one of our friends is a diabetic, we know that about him. And so we might bring things to deal with that if needed. The other thing is an exit strategy. Sometimes there really isn't one. So bringing something like a spot device, if you're doing the middle fork feather, that's probably the only way you're getting out. Being able to recognize the severity. One of the times that I dealt with an injury, it was a sprained ankle on Hell's Canyon on night one. And the group, and I ended up going with the group diagnosis. I kind of knew it was a sprain. The patient was displaying symptoms of a break, even though the visual symptoms in my own assessment would indicate it wasn't that severe. But because of the mentality of the patient and the mentality of the group being uncomfortable of going forward, and because we were in a scenario where you had jet boat support, we were able to jet boat back upstream and get out. we ended up evacuating the patient. But that's kind of one of those things where sometimes, and I've been in this scenario too, where you have to trust your diagnosis if you have the skill set to do so, and you have to help those people work through that issue, so long as it's not making more issues for the group that you're with. And that's really a tough call. And I think that really comes from experience and your willingness to be in that role. You know, if you don't have the training or experience to do a diagnosis or feel confident that you're not affecting someone with a diagnosis or affecting the group with the diagnosis, might be best to evacuate. But, you know, I would like to wrap that up with, it comes down to a group consensus. You have to make a decision as a group, and you have to make a decision with the patient, given that they are alert and aware and able to make those decisions for themselves.
I totally agree. And I've been in some similar situations. Yeah. So I have this is kind of a random question, but have you or Jacob have trouble with your shoulders ever?
Oh yeah. Well,
Yeah.
my shoulder, I don't know if Jacob's had difficulty with his shoulders. We've been realizing that we're a lot less strong in body weight exercises or calisthenics than we thought we might be, because both of us grew up with high school sports backgrounds where a lot of the training was big weights and heavy lifting, where now, and my brother is a trainer for high school, the approach is much different, at least how he runs it, is it's a lot of body weight exercises, a lot of physical therapy types of exercises to make people strong overall, versus what the old method was, is, you know, deadlift, squat, bench press, cleans. And for me, I had shoulder issues before I started paddling because I played volleyball and I played tennis for a lot of years. So I had a shoulder impingement before I started paddling or rowing. And yeah, so I've been dealing with that, and I've been through physical therapy for most of my life. And I've realized, someone asked, what are the exercises that you need to do as a paddler? For me, what I've realized is body weight exercises, lots of stretching, yoga, all these things that I think a lot of paddlers realize is important. I'm realizing as I get older and less stretchy and more pains, that those are just really, really important if we want to be able to do that long term.
Sure. I think we're going to do a panel on shoulders at some point.
I would love to watch that.
There's so much, and I'm going to ask Gavin to be on it, even though he hasn't said yes yet.
Awesome.
Well, let me see. I've got more questions and a few comments. There were a few of us that were curious to hear a little more about your R2 experience, your date on the Little White at low water.
Yeah. I think it was at the point in our relationship where it wasn't even a first date. Both of us just were at a party the night before, and we're talking, and he's like, does anybody want to R2 the Little White and at low water? And I was like, well, I have access to a 10-foot SOTAR. I would definitely do that. And we ended up doing it, and it was really fun. And yeah, it was just very memorable. And it was it was in the summer, is 1.5 feet. So like, I don't know, 90 something degrees, just really fun, kind of low stress. And I was with an expert guide who'd done it a lot before. So I felt very confident and comfortable, and I got to see a special place that I really didn't think I'd be able to see at that stage in my paddling.
Yeah, sounds great. And another random one, how tall is Vesuvius Falls?
Jacob? 30? 40. 40. Okay, he says 40 feet.
Pretty tall. You guys run that routinely?
No, Jacob has run it once, just the one time on the first trip.
It's been run less than 10 times.
It's been run less than 10 times, Jacob has said. I looked at it and it looked really scary to me.
It's a little thin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the scouting above it can get tricky. So if you put in above it, there's a lot of variables involved. For me, I just chose to put in below it.
Okay, so the standard launch is just at the base of the fall.
Actually not. We figured that out later because I didn't want to run it. So Jacob found an old logging road that got close enough, and then we bushwhacked to the bottom. So after the access had kind of been figured out, I guess because I didn't want to run the waterfall, we were more motivated to find the alternative access, and it ended up working out great.
Yeah, good for you for sticking up for yourself. Oh, this one's not really a question. It's kind of a comment from me, and it has to do with public perception. For people that run the Wind River, and I'm sure you've run the upper and lower Wind, the access point that is in common between those is the High Bridge Road.
Yeah.
And the very last structure that you drive past on your way in is kind of a warehouse building. And the guy that lives there in that warehouse, a boater ran over his cat.
Oh my God.
It's been like probably
and
10
I know that
years
guy
ago
has
now.
been asking people for years, like, please be respectful. Like,
well, he's angry still, and he will
I would be
sometimes
too.
come out and try to pick a fight with boaters. And the best thing we can do is just shower him with love because he misses his cat.
That's heartbreaking.
I know, it's so sad.
Please be nice to him, everyone.
I know, be nice to the guy, even though he seems mean, he's just a softie. Seems like there was one more. Oh yeah, Mambo wanted to ask something about trusting being a coward, and is there a valid reason that you are frightened? Well, yes, of course there is.
That is a great question, and something that Jacob and I and others have discussed at length, which is maybe also its own presentation. But I think part of gaining experience as a paddler is, and in most adventure sports, I would say, is the ability to discern when fear is just fear and when fear is justified. Knowing the difference between fear and actual danger, and fear and lack of confidence, or fear to make the right decisions, if that makes sense. And that comes from experience and mentorship, and in a number of lessons in different scenarios. And I would say I've made plenty of mistakes where I've let fear dictate my decisions, and that has resulted in a worse outcome for myself and a worse outcome from the group, which is really unacceptable. But I think as I've gotten more experience, I've made decisions where I've really stuck to my gut feeling of, no, that this fear is real, and I think there's a hazard, and this is why. And I think a lot of it comes down to is being able to explain what the fear is derived from and where it's coming from, and being able to make a decision that doesn't impact the group adversely if not absolutely necessary, and being able to make a good decision for yourself as well, that's not putting yourself in a more hazardous scenario, but also not putting other people at risk.
Wonderful point. I think unless there's another question to come really soon, we can let it end at that. That was a wonderful conclusion. Thank you so much, Priscilla.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been great.
Yeah. Oh, Mambo still wants to talk, but in general, gang, we're what, an hour and a half in? Almost hour and 20 minutes in, and we can keep going a little while longer, but if you need to go, it's okay. We love you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for studying on this question of how to develop whitewater judgment. And I hope you join the Lower Columbia Canoe Club and continue on all these other great talks we've got coming up too.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Well, I think we have 10 more minutes that was scheduled, so I'm available for 10 more minutes.
10 more minutes. Bring it, Mambo.
Well, thank you, Teresa, and thank you again, Priscilla, even though I've already thanked you. One of the things that came up earlier is dealing with injuries in wild settings. There was kind of an internal discussion within WKCC about river ratings. And I found myself on the downside of the argument about class 4s, class 3s relative to where they were, like Whistling Bird 3 on the Waihi versus class 3 on the Chutes, where you got a road right next. In the Waihi, you're friggin' helicopter. So it's like, how does that figure into ratings? Well, you know, doggy sneakers came up. My position has always been that access to help affects river ratings. I was kind of talked down from that. No, you know, river ratings are subjective. But you mentioned a couple of experiences where you had to have evacuations, or at least seriously consider them. What is your position on that? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And for me, I think, so we've had this discussion a lot, and actually on my recent road trip, we were having a discussion with our friends on the trip about the rating system and just how many variables can be involved. And as a ski instructor, you're probably aware of, you know, the alpine rating system and the climbing rating system. And it gets so complex so quickly. You have, you know, the fall rating, the protection rating, bouldering rating, trad rating, sport climb rating, and the alpine rating. And I think in paddling, it'd be so easy to go down that rabbit hole. But I think what is effective is in communicating, whether it be through AW narratives or wherever, you know, wherever you're getting your paddling resources, say, you know, this is a class 3 run. I guess I'm thinking like is it the Middle Fork Flathead?
Oh, that is a fly-in.
That is a fly-in. Yeah, the Middle Fork Flathead, very, very remote fly-in run, not particularly difficult whitewater, but if something were to go wrong, you're in a really, really remote setting. And so you absolutely have to factor that in. Would that change the rating of the whitewater? No, but I think that is something that paddlers need to factor in. Are you doing a roadside run? Or are you doing a very remote run? And what is the capabilities of your group, and how able are you to deal with something going wrong of any sort of things? Yeah.
How about Uriah Jones? I see a hand up.
Hey, Uriah.
Right. Hi, Priscilla. I had a question about group dynamics, and I know you and Jacob do a fabulous job with this, so I'd be interested for you to share your thoughts. How do you address, not so much with the remote wilderness, but as you're doing just more standard runs, especially with less skilled paddlers, like maybe offering encouragement to those paddlers who are nervous to step up and progress, as well as offering caution to some of those paddlers who maybe are a little bit like aggressive and risk-taking, and how you handle those kind of group dynamics, or what kind of feedback do you give when you're interacting with those people?
I think that's a great question, Uriah. I think for the most part, when we've been taking people down a river, there's a general sense of enthusiasm and wonder for the experience that they're having. And most of them are very open to the feedback. And we try to do it in a pretty organic way of, you know, if we're scouting a rapid and someone asks for information, we try to give it and try not to impose our own views of the rapid on them, and just ask them questions and encourage them to make the decision on their own, versus what I've felt has happened to me in the past in some scenarios is where people overly discourage not running, or overly encourage running something for whatever reasons, because they're putting their own biases into the communication they're giving. So we try to stay away from that. Of course, if there's a major hazard that's not obvious, we're going to communicate that to them and say, well, have you recognized this, and how do you plan on dealing with that, or something like that. And then the other part of the question, overzealous paddlers. I would say that I started out that way. And one of the most impactful things that one of my friends said to me at the time, when I was doing things that really were unacceptable and impacting the group, is, you know, we care about you, and seeing you swim is really scary and we don't like it. Can you, you know, take a step back? And I'm sure for that person, that was an incredibly hard conversation to have. But it was necessary, and it changed my perspective, and it you know, probably saved me from other scary experiences at that time. And I've been reminded of that in several stages of my kayaking progression, that, you know, river running is very serious. There's very real life consequences for your decisions. And think about that, you know, your decisions impact other people. So I think phrasing it from that standpoint is hard, but sometimes necessary, and can help avoid very difficult and heartbreaking scenarios down the road. Fortunately, I think there's not very many people that are completely overzealous and unskilled. So hopefully those conversations are more rare than common. But yeah, don't be afraid to come at people from a point of caring and tell them, you know, take a step back if it's necessary.
Awesome. Thank you.
You bet.
And so very valuable. Yes. Anyone else?
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You bet. You're listening.
All right. Well, wonderful evening. Thank you, Priscilla, for answering questions and for your delightful photographs and your clear thinking about how to be an asset in paddling.
Thank you for having me. It was very enjoyable.
I hope that we all keep thinking about this in the future. And I hope to see you in a couple of weeks for Tree's talk about hips and shoulders and all those other body parts that we have to keep in shape for paddling.
Sounds great.
Yeah, especially if we want to keep doing it forever. You need both judgment and fitness.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tree. Have a wonderful evening, people. I'm going to end this
Priscilla.
thing. Hope you're well.